Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Peter Tatchell, who will be known to many as an activist and a campaigner. And it's a real pleasure for me to welcome Peter to the Godcast. How are you, Peter?
Good, thank you, and I'm very honoured to be asked.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. So you're based in London, is that right? Has that been home for a long time, Peter?
I've lived in London since 1971 when I moved here from Australia at the age of 19.
And does it feel like home? Is there ever a yearning to travel or disappear from the city?
No, London is home. I love it.
Okay. Oh well, it's really lovely to get you onto the Godcast, and um, there's so many things I could talk to you about, Peter, and so many questions I could ask. But as it's a Godcast, and because the church has been in the news recently around the living in love and faith stuff, around blessing of same-sex relationships, it'd be wrong not to talk about that. But before we get there, what was life like for you as a young guy, Peter? What was your kind of first awareness of your own identity and even sexuality as a young bloke?
Well, I was born in Melbourne, Australia in 1952, and I grew up all of my years in Australia when male homosexuality was punishable by severe prison sentences, and even in some cases, enforced psychiatric treatment on the assumption by the authorities that homosexuality was an illness and a sickness. So I lived in fear as a gay man of arrest and punishment. At that time in Melbourne, there were no LGBT plus organizations, no switchboards, no helplines, no counseling services, and definitely no campaign groups. We're talking about the late 1960s. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So it was very isolating.
And am I right in saying you were raised in a Christian family?
My parents were very strict, very devout evangelical Pentecostalists. Our whole family life revolved around the church. The expectation and demand was that I went to Sunday school and church every Sunday. My parents were, incredibly strict about, what I could do and what I couldn't do. For me, it was quite suffocating.
Well, maybe that's that answer my follow-up question. I was going to say, was any part of that enjoyable experience, or was it entirely suffocating in that way?
No, it wasn't very enjoyable. Of course, when I was young, I bought into it because I knew nothing different. But as I got in my teenage years, I could see this was clearly a very oppressive form of Christianity. And just to give you a flavor, if you've read the book or seen the film Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, that pretty much sums up my family.
Really? Okay. Did you have enough confidence about yourself to challenge your parents about their theology and their way of life?
Yeah, I did from maybe my early teens to mid-teens. But that would get me a punch in the face from my stepfather. And threats that I'd be punished and damned in hell.
Yeah.
But for me, there are lots of things that turned me against religion. One of them, of course, was the fact that most of the churches in Australia supported the Vietnam War and Australia's involvement in that war. And they didn't support conscientious objectors and those who had opposition to the war. And I thought that was really shocking. Many of them supported the death penalty. They were complicit in the abuse of Indigenous Black Australians, the Aboriginal people. There were lots of very many negative things. But of course, I only learned this as I was growing up in my teenage years. Prior to that, I thought, the church was wonderful.
And where are you now with the church, Peter? I mean, we all evolve and mature, don't we? And I had no interest in church till I was 40. But for yourself, where are you now with the relationship with first of all, maybe we can break that down a little bit. Maybe organised religion, but also the Church of England as it's it's going through difficult times.
Well, I gave up on religion by the age of 20 for the reasons I just described, and also because I developed towards a humanist outlook based on rational thought and science, and do not believe that an irrational, superstitious belief in a supreme being and all that doesn't make any sense, and there's no evidence for it. So I'm an atheist, a humanist, a secularist. But of course, I respect the right of people to hold religious beliefs, providing they don't discriminate against or harm others. And that has been the big historic problem. Organized religion has, throughout the centuries, been probably the single greatest oppressor of women and LGBT plus people. They've got a lot to answer for. Now, of course, I don't damn all religious people on that account. I remember at the time of the legislation of same-sex marriage in the UK, 55% of people of faith supported the right of couples to get married in civil ceremonies. 55%. I know there are many great champions of LGBT plus rights in this country, around the world, and in history. One of my heroes was Martin Luther King, who led the Black Civil Rights Movement in the United States in the 1950s and 60s. Another is, of course, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was a pivotal figure in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Mm. And he, of course, went on to compare homophobia to racism and made a very strong, passionate defense of LGBT plus human rights, going against many of his co-religionists.
Yeah, Tutu is an absolute hero of mine as well, Peter. I want to come back to the church stuff, just but kind of keep it in your earlier days, Peter. Tell us about what it was that made you going from being a regular guy living a normal life to become a campaigner and an activist. What was the kind of the pivots in your life and the things that were really making you itch where you were scratching regarding human rights?
The single greatest influence was probably the Black Civil Rights Movement in America. I was far away in Australia, but it was on the nightly news bulletins almost every day. And I was truly inspired by the courage and justice of the cause of African Americans. I saw them as fighting a just battle, and it awakened my consciousness about injustices closer to home. So, for example, my mother suffered from life-threatening asthma. She nearly died 8 times during my childhood. A lot of our family income was spent on medical bills and medicine. And that made us very, very poor. We were poor to start with. My family was, very traditional working class, low income family, but we were absolutely impoverished by the lack of any equivalent to the National Health Service and having to find all this extra money for the basic medicines and medical care for my mother. I can remember coming home from school after playing sport and going to the fridge and cupboards, and there was nothing there. It was tough, very, very tough. And I thought to myself just how wrong it was that we should suffer so much simply because my mother was ill. So that was one factor on top of the Black Civil Rights Movement. But also, of course, I learned about Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War and the truth behind that war, which the public weren't being told, and how the United States blocked free and fair elections in the 1950s, was guilty of gross human rights abuses, the mass aerial bombardment of civilian areas, the torture and massacre of Vietnamese civilians, most notably, of course, at My Lai in, I think, 1969. Another big issue was the death penalty in the state of Victoria. In 1967, Ronald Ryan, an escaped convict who allegedly shot dead a prison warder during his jail escape, was due to be hanged. And at the age of 15, based on autopsy reports I read about in the local papers, I knew that there was serious doubt about whether he was guilty. The trajectory of the bullet would have had to do a U-turn in midair to have shot dead that warder.
Mm.
And that just made me very angry that a law and order right-wing government was prepared to hang a man just to get votes in an upcoming election. So all those factors, pushed me towards campaigning. And then, of course, when I was 17 and realized I was gay, again, that made it very, very personal and direct for me, given the very oppressive laws and widespread social homophobia that existed at that time. Back then, the police in Melbourne, not all police, but some police, they would go out gay bashing, as for sport. They'd go to gay meeting places and cruising areas and beat up gay people for fun, and they got away with it. I felt something had to be done. So in 1969, when I heard about the first gay liberation protest in New York, about 2 months after the Stonewall riots, I thought to myself, yes, that's what we need here in Melbourne. I asked some of my gay friends if they were willing, and they all looked at me in horror, saying, "What do you know? You're only 17. Go away. You'll get us all arrested." So all I could do was write letters to the press, challenging homophobic reporting and making the case for the decriminalization of homosexuality. But I've got to tell you, I did not dare sign my name, let alone give my address, because I feared a policeman's knock on the door.
Yeah. And how difficult was it for you, Peter, living all that, kind of seeing that going on before you, and the fact you'd established that you were a gay man, and how was that in relation to your family with a very conservative upbringing that you had? Was that a difficult period for you? Were you, for want of a better word, were you booted out, or were you? Was there any suggestion of conversion in the family? And how did that affect your relationship with your parents?
Well, I did not tell my parents for a few years because I feared they were so homophobic they would turn me and my partner over to the police. So I didn't dare tell them. But, for me, it was very important to live my life as best I could, true to myself. Now, I was very lucky to meet someone who I fell in love with and had a wonderful, supportive relationship with. But, every time, whenever we were going to have a sexual relationship, we would always make sure the door was locked, the windows were closed, the curtains were drawn, because people did snitch on gay people and get them arrested. So it was, a slightly apprehensive atmosphere in which to have a relationship. But having said that, for me, I can remember when we first had sex, I wasn't sure that I was gay. I suspected I probably was about the age of 17. So I decided to try it and see. And when I first had sex with the guy who ended up being my partner and today is my lifelong best friend, I remember lying back on the bed and thinking, wow, if this is gay sex, then I'm definitely gay. For me, it was not only an incredible sexual experience, it was also an incredible emotional experience. For me, I just thought to myself, the Bible and the church have got it wrong. We weren't harming anybody. We hadn't caused any suffering. This was something that gave us great happiness and fulfillment. So why should it be wrong? Why should it be condemned?
Yeah.
At least in the Old Testament, if not in the New.
I want to come back to that, but so did you eventually come out to your parents? Was there suspicion in any way before? Were there quite a questions? Why have you not got a girlfriend? Those kind of things, or not?
Oh yeah, I had that all the time. My approach was that for me, coming out should never be a revenge, should never be a sort of a punishment. It should be, a gentle, honest revelation. And I thought, given my parents' extreme views, they regarded homosexuality almost on a par with murder and rape. I knew that just coming out with it would not only put me and my partner in danger, but also cause them incredible mental and emotional anguish. So I adopted a strategy of bit by bit, drip by drip. So I would drop hints by saying, for example, if there was some news report about a gay man being arrested, I would say, whether you agree with homosexuality or not, what he does in his own private life is none of our business. He shouldn't be arrested. Or I would say that, there was a gay friend at work and he was a lovely person. Why are people so hostile to gay people?
Yeah.
So after a period of about 3 years or 4 years, my parents gradually put 2 and 2 together and came up with 4. So it was actually my mother who asked me, are you homosexual? When she felt comfortable to say it. And of course, I confirmed that I was. There were some tears, and there was some period of distress, but my mother always said, and my father, that was the kinder, gentler way to do it. That they over time began to adjust to the idea, that they had suspicions, and it prompted them to read a bit about homosexuality to improve their understanding, so that when they felt ready to ask, it wasn't such a shock. It was still a bit of a shock to have it confirmed, but it wasn't the trauma that it would have been if I'd blurted it out at the age of 17.
It's fascinating listening to you, Peter. I just want to come back to what you'd said about sex, and I'm on the General Synod for the Church of England, and there has been moments. I've only been on it 18 months, but in that time, there's been times where I've seriously considered walking away because, frankly, because of the bigotry that I'm subjected to, and that's as a heterosexual man. But this idea, this concept of sex, you talked about it there in what I thought was a really lovely way, and people try and suggest it's not. Sex is kind of something that's dirty and unattractive, and particularly in the church. And I'm really interested in what you think about this because I've got a lot of gay Christians, priests who are gay, who are subjected to kind of a rules, following the rules, or you are subjected to a clergy disciplinary measure or whatever it is. It seems really kind of antiquated and old-fashioned to me that, in the church to be ordained, you have to swear to a life of celibacy and you have to promise to abide by the rules. And, I find that deeply uncomfortable. And I'm not expecting you to show any sympathy to that. But when you hear those kind of things and what priests have to go through, what's your initial thoughts and reactions, Peter?
Well, regardless of my own views, for the last 40, 50 years, I have been supporting gay Christians within the church. I've stood up and defended many priests who've been sacked or had their promotions blocked because, they have a human right to be who they are and love who they do, providing they don't harm anybody else. To me, it's been very important to stand in solidarity with not just LGBT plus Christians, but also their friends and allies within the church, because they are challenging prejudice, discrimination, and more. And that's really important. For me, it is unconscionable that the church is willing to bless pets and warships, but not loving same-sex couples. That's so outrageous. I can remember when I went into the pulpit of the Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, in 1998, in Canterbury Cathedral, my point was very simple. Discrimination is not a Christian value. And I think it's very sad that many in the church don't recognize that. Now, I've never said that the church should be forced by law to conduct same-sex marriages. What I have said is that individual priests and congregations should be allowed to perform same-sex marriages if they wish to. So it should be an option, not a compulsion. But of course, ultimately, I do wish that all branches and sections of the church would acknowledge that gay love or same-sex love is worthy of blessing and marriage.
Yeah, thank you for that, Peter. But that incident with George Carey, how long ago did you say that was?
That was 1998.
1998, and
I've got to say that he condemned and denounced me at the time, but since has had a Damascene conversion. He's now describing me as a hero of our time, and ahead of my time, and someone who stood on the right side of history. In the Netflix documentary Hating Peter Tatchell, he is extremely generous in reevaluating his own stance and paying tribute to my campaigns. And that's very heartwarming, because my style of campaigning is never to want to make people enemies or to cast them out forever. I believe in redemption, the opportunity of people to rethink and reassess and change their minds and come over to what we might call the side of the angels.
Yeah, and the church now, over 20 years since that incident, is still not much nearer allowing gay weddings to take place in church, which is a huge sadness for me. We're kind of dabbling with a prayer of a blessing. Do you think the church has got the legs for this journey? Do you think the church is becoming, because there are still millions of Christians in the country, but do you think they are losing, or they have lost their place of relevance in society now?
Well, my mother, when she was alive, went on a big journey from that extreme homophobia to an understanding acceptance of LGBT plus people. She came around eventually to the view that it was not homosexuality so much as homophobia that was the big sin. And she always said that, it's up to each individual to make their pact with God. It's not up to the church to dictate. It's up to the individual. And so, she, for the most part, supported my human rights campaigns, including those against church homophobia. She said the same thing, discrimination is not compatible with the gospel of love and compassion that Jesus Christ is recorded as preaching. She said that each person must find their own peace and pact with God, and that she wanted to see a church that was inclusive and open, not a church that closed its doors and shut people out. She also, of course, on a personal level, has been incredibly supportive of my partner through the years. She's welcoming him into her home. She has video chats on WhatsApp, or used to when she was alive. That's again an amazing story of a personal journey, which again shows the importance of keeping the door open to people to change their hearts and minds. Just because someone was once a homophobe, it doesn't mean to say they're always going to be a homophobe. And if they change, then we should embrace that and thank them and welcome them. We should accept them into our hearts on the basis that they have recognized a wrong and have done something to fix it.
Yeah, you made me think there about myself, Peter. As a young guy, I was quite homophobic. I was in a very male orientated environment, and the language was quite crass and awful, if I'm being honest. But over a period of years, I've worked and befriended many gay people, and now I'd like to think myself as a strong advocate. You talked about Christian values, Peter, and you mentioned also the Netflix documentary Hating Peter Tatchell, and I just watched a trailer before we began the interview, and there was some not very Christian values on the screen. You were being assaulted, and I actually shuddered with the force of the violence that was used against you. And there are some very vociferous opponents to the LGBT cause, not only in Christianity, but of course in Islam and Judaism. What kind of cost has your activism come to you, Peter? Just share some of the torrent of abuse that you've received over the years.
Well, over the last 56 years that I've been campaigning for human rights, not just LGBT plus rights, but all human rights for everyone, I've been involved in more than 3,000 direct action protests. I've been arrested about 100 times, and I've had more than 300 violent assaults upon me personally. You know, fists, boots, bricks, sticks, bottles, you name it. Attempts to stab me, a bullet through the front door, 50, more than 50 attacks upon my flat. It's been like living through a low-level civil war. You know, I've suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder for decades. I still live with night terrors, reliving in my dreams or nightmares some of the violent attacks upon me. So it's been very, very tough. And even today, you know, I live with, you know, death threats, hate mail, threats to kill me, rape me, castrate me. It's pretty gross stuff. But I've survived. I'm probably a bit damaged, but, you know, it isn't stopping me. And, you know, I want to carry on for another, you know, 20 plus years. I hopefully might retire in my late 90s. Health willing, I'll carry on till then. But yeah, it's been a very traumatic experience. But I always say nothing by comparison to what happens to human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia, Russia, Uganda, Iran, and dozens of other countries around the world. They lose their lives and liberty. You know, I'm still alive. I've never been jailed. So, you know, I count myself lucky.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about, you know, particularly in the Christian context in Uganda, where in recent months homosexuality is now illegal and is punishable by the death penalty. What you know, and I'm appalled really the way that the church is just kind of silent on these matters, but also the government. What's your own take on this? Do you think you know, the governments try and just pass it off with all these human rights abuses in places such as Saudi Arabia, where all the footballers are going at the moment, the World Cup in Qatar? How do you kind of bring that all together, Peter?
Well, I think we can say with pretty much certainty that most of the homophobia in the 66 countries that still criminalize same-sex relations is driven by organized religion, not necessarily by individual people of faith, some of who are very supportive of LGBT plus rights, but organized religion. So in Uganda, the main impetus is coming from the Church of Uganda, which is an affiliate of the Anglican Communion. There have been occasionally very brave Anglicans in Uganda who've spoken out, like Christopher Sanyonjo. But what happened to him was he was excommunicated from the church, even stripped of his pension, and he's now in his late 80s and living in poverty and destitution. We did not see the archbishops of Canterbury speak out in his defense. We have not seen pressure on the Church of Uganda to reinstate his pension. And likewise, when it comes to that homophobia, we really need major Christian leaders like the Archbishop of Canterbury to go to Uganda and speak personally with the president and with the leader of the Anglican Church in Uganda, to speak to the media there, to give a clear voice of solidarity and support for the LGBT plus community, to show very, very clearly that the Christian church in this country is opposed to that discrimination and to this particularly odious Anti-Homosexuality Act, which includes the death penalty for certain same-sex acts. We need the church to go there. And we need, of course, particularly to have Black church leaders go there. So, you know, John Sentamu, you know, when he was Archbishop of York, washed his hands of the tyranny against LGBT plus people in Uganda. But as someone from Uganda and someone so senior in the church, if he had any conscience, he would have gone to Uganda and spoke out against the intense persecution of LGBT plus people. Even before the Anti-Homosexuality Act, the maximum penalty for homosexuality in Uganda was life imprisonment. Life imprisonment. people are being jailed, and those that are not jailed are subjected to mob violence. I have friends in Uganda who have been murdered by homophobic mobs, and the perpetrators have mostly got away with it. Church leaders in Uganda and in Britain have not spoken out against that mob violence. We need to hear those voices.
It's very powerful, Peter. You know, it is, because this is you're talking about the church that I'm part of, and it does make me ashamed when I hear you talk about that. It's very moving to hear that, you know, and I wonder what I can do as a vicar of a parish. But I suppose if we can all do something together, can't we? Where all of us are more powerful than just one of us, and maybe you could offer something, because a lot of priests and Christians will watch this. What would you say to Christians in this country about that matter specifically, Peter? What can we do?
Well, you can write to the Ugandan High Commissioner in London to express your concern and to urge a rethink. You can write to a member of Parliament and ask them to seek the Foreign Secretary and the Commonwealth Secretary General, Patricia Scotland, to write to the Ugandan president. You can also amplify Ugandan LGBT plus voices on social media, or donate to LGBT plus organizations in Uganda, like Sexual Minorities Uganda. These are all simple things, easy things that can be done. And of course, in many of your communities, there will be LGBT plus Ugandan people who have fled persecution and need support. And as you know, they're not allowed to work by government diktat. They're forced to live on pitiful government handouts of about £40 a week for all their food, travel, clothes, mobile phone, etc. It's impossible. They're living in extreme destitution, as indeed are all refugees awaiting the passage of their application for asylum. I mean, it's absolutely unconscionable that the government will not allow refugees to work when they want to work, and many of them have the skills we need and could be boosting our economy. And instead of receiving benefits from the state, they could be earning their own keep, paying for their own accommodation, and paying tax and national insurance. The policy is completely mad and totally immoral.
Wow. Peter, this interview is absolutely flown by, but I do just want to touch on a matter away from LGBT issues and the church, and that is one that's close to my heart, is the issue of poverty in the UK, and you know, I mean, you can see your poster there. 10% wealth tax on 171 UK billionaires raises £60 billion. Do you think it matters which government we have in anymore, whether it's Labour or Conservative? Do you think that poverty is something that we now it's just become normalised in this country? It certainly feels like that for me here in Burnley.
There's no doubt that the idea there isn't enough money to pay the nurses and junior doctors, the teachers, etc., to fund the National Health Service and social care properly. The idea that there isn't enough money is absolute bunkum. You know, there is the money. It's just that successive governments have protected the wealth of the very, very rich in order to sustain an unjust system which impoverishes millions. And that is unethical and so wrong. You know, I believe in a fairer, more just society for everyone. And it is really important that we have a government that is committed to achieving that. Now, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, but during the last Labour government, there was a serious and effective, you know, programme to tackle child poverty. It did work. It did help. Under Keir Starmer today, I'm very worried. You know, he's rowed back on lots of commitments, including commitments to tackle poverty, and that is a cause for great concern. I understand he's perhaps doing that because he wants to be seen as fiscally responsible and not give ammunition to the Tories, but that is not what a Labour government in waiting should be saying. It should be standing on the side of the poor and explaining how a wealth tax, as you can see on my wall, can fund proper services and proper benefits for those in need. It is doable. It just requires the will. And we do need to say loud and clear that one of the biggest problems we have in this country is the anti-democratic, corrupt voting system, first past the post. That's the reason why we've had so many years of conservative rule. No conservative government since 1931 has ever won a majority of the public vote. Every conservative government has been a minority supported government. So, for example, Boris Johnson won just under 44% of the vote in 2019, but the Conservatives bagged 56% of the seats and got an 80-seat majority. That is not democratic. Now, if we had a fair voting system, it would mean more coalitions. And I'm not in favor of coalitions per se, but if that is the British people's will, that's how it should be. And we know that, Margaret Thatcher, also back in 1983 with her landslide, and Tony Blair with his landslide in 1997, they would have never had their supermajorities in Parliament if we'd had proportional representation. They would have had to consult and negotiate and ally with other parties to build a consensus. And that's what we need, a consensus. And the consensus in Britain is very clearly for more wealth taxes on the mega rich and for stronger action against poverty. That's what the British people want, but our voting system is preventing that from happening.
Thanks, Peter. It's been really, I wouldn't say lovely is quite the word, but it's been fascinating listening to your thoughts. I do want to, I would love to know what Peter Tatchell does to chill and relax and let yourself, take yourself away from the pressures of what you do. What your outside interests of activism and and campaigning, Peter?
Relaxation, very rarely and with great difficulty. Not because I don't want to, but my workload is so massive. I get sometimes nearly 2,000 messages and requests every day. 2,000. I'm working 12, 14, 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I'd love to have a break, but there's so many important issues and campaigns to do. And, I can't say I'm too busy when, someone in Afghanistan under threat from the Taliban appeals for my help. I want to be able to tell them loud and clear, I'm on their side, to give them moral support and practical advice on what to do to escape the situation where they're at risk. So for me, that's really, really important. Simply, I don't have enough funds to employ the staff I need to give me a bit more, a bit better work-life balance. But I would love it. I would love it in the long run.
Oh, well, you must try. I mean, pastorally caring for you, Peter, you must try and find a little bit of time for rest and relaxation.
But occasionally, actually probably once a week, I do allocate about an hour or so, and I listen to my favorite trance dance music. For me, I don't know, it must be something to do with the way my brain is wired, but I find that incredibly relaxing and invigorating to lose myself in the music and just to go to a completely different mental plane.
Yeah,
that's one really good relaxation. Also, sometimes I take a bicycle around through local parks or along the River Thames. That's also very relaxing, but I don't get to do it nearly enough.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I totally concur with you. Music is a great escape. It's a place I journey to frequently to just get me away from it. Peter, it's been lovely meeting you and listening to what you've got to say. There's food for thought for lots of people there. Just finally tell us about the documentary that you mentioned before, on Netflix. I've watched the trailer. I think we're going to watch it in the family tonight. Just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, the Netflix documentary is called Hating Peter Tatchell. A very controversial title. Grabbed your attention. It wasn't made by me. It was made by an independent filmmaker. He had total editorial control. But I did collaborate with him, and he shadowed me when I went to Moscow in 2018 to stage a protest on the opening day of the World Cup by Red Square. I collaborated with the director because I wanted to show that social change is possible and to give people tips on how they might achieve it. So for me, the purpose or the aim of this film is to inspire people to become change makers themselves. So yeah, do go and watch it, and hopefully it will give you some tips and ideas about how you can make change in your life, your community, and those around you. We can all be change makers. We are thankfully living in a better society than our forebears many generations, but that is only because they were change makers. So we owe it to the next generation to also be change makers, to give the generations to come a better world than we inherited.
Well, on that note, thank you, Peter. It's like I say, it's been a real pleasure. To everybody who's watching, this is the Godcast. I'm Father Alex. I'm the vicar at St Matthew's in Burnley. I'm also the host of the Godcast and the author of my new book, Our Daily Bread, Argos to the Altar, which is out now. Peter, thank you so much. I really genuinely appreciate your time and wish you all the very best and in your future campaigns. And thank you for what you're doing for so many people on the fringes of our society. Thank you.
Oh, can I just say one last thing? If anybody is interested in the work I do, please go to my foundation website, petertatchellfoundation.org. In the top right-hand corner, there's a little button which says Join Us. If you give us your email address, we will send you a weekly bulletin of LGBT+ and other human rights issues. Most of them very serious, but we always try and put in a quirky, funny one to give you a laugh as well. It's totally free. There's no charge. And next to the Join Us button, there is the Donate button. We depend entirely on donations from well-wishers to sustain the work that our foundation does. So if you can afford it, maybe please, give us, £2, £3, or £5 a month. That would really, really help. And I'll finish off with my motto: don't accept the world as it is. Dream of what the world could be, and then help make it happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.